Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much indeed for joining us for the launch of the Greater Manchester Serious Violence Action Plan. Joined today by the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, Baroness Beverley Hughes, Deputy Chief Constable Ian Pilling, but also really pleased to welcome Ismail with us today, who is from the Bolton Solidarity Community Association and Chair of Bolton CVS. Also joined by Helen Lowey, who is Director of Public Health for Bolton and has been the public health lead on the steering group that has developed this plan. So you'll hear from everybody. I'll just say a few words really to set the scene for the plan. And I thought I'd start really just with an update on crime within Greater Manchester. We have a paper going to the Policing and Crime panel tomorrow, which shows that there has been an 8% reduction in recorded crime in Greater Manchester between 2018 and 2019, which is encouraging news. Overall, 28,000 fewer offences. And just to give you some of the specific crime areas that we've got figures for, 8% reduction in burglary, 9% reduction in robbery, a 10% reduction in domestic abuse, a 3% reduction in rape. So there is some encouraging signs, and particularly along with other police forces around the country, Greater Manchester Police has been using the surge funding that came from the Home Office to focus on knife crime. Over the last few years, we've seen a big increase in knife crime across the country, as colleagues will know, but certainly between 2015 and 2018. I think nationally there was a doubling in knife crime. We're still working on the figures, just verifying them. But what we are reporting today is a 16% reduction in knife-related hospital admissions in Greater Manchester. And we think the reduction in knife crime between 2018 and 2019 is something similar, although, as I say, we're just still working to verify that figure, though the hospital figure is a reliable one. So, as I say, there is some encouraging signs here, and this comes, of course, as we've begun to recruit police officers again in Greater Manchester. We're hopefully now in a position to build on that recent success. I've agreed with the Chief and Deputy Chief Constable that we will move back towards a position where communities can know their local officers. So we're committing, both myself and the Deputy Mayor, to a named neighbourhood beat officer and a named police community support officer for all wards in Greater Manchester. And that will be delivered over the course of this year. We're saying today, as part of this plan, and the Deputy Mayor will say more in a moment, we're saying that we want to, where there is a need and where schools want one and the community supports it, we will reintroduce school-based police officers. That too is something that is a call that has been coming from many schools, and we're now in a position to be able to offer that again, given that we have been able to start recruiting extra officers for Greater Manchester Police. But to get to the point, before I hand over to the Deputy Mayor, enforcement can take you so far. And actually, that isn't what is at the heart of this plan that we're publishing today. This plan is very much about a different approach to serious violence, learning from other parts of the country that have taken forward the public health approach, and we'll hear Helen on that in a moment. We want to take that a stage further and in many ways go right down to where we need to go, which is to work with communities, not to do to, but to work with. And what we're proposing today at the heart of this plan is a community-led approach to tackling serious violence. So part of that is, of course, about building trust and working, as I say, with people rather than doing to people. We've recently made a commitment to establish a race equality panel in Greater Manchester, and in September we will publish the first of a regular quarterly report on race equality in policing in Greater Manchester and the use of police powers across different communities. This is important in terms of building trust, but we recognise we need to go much further than that and work with the voluntary and community sector to develop much more preventative approaches. So as part of this plan today, we're confirming that we will establish community-led pilots in 6 of our local authority areas: Manchester, Salford, Bolton, Bury, Oldham and Tameside. And what we want to do there is start with communities and build better solutions to tackling serious violence in the long run. And of course, much of this work starts with hope and with giving young people opportunity. As Mayor, I've committed to bringing forward a young person's guarantee in Greater Manchester. We're not going to allow COVID to derail the life chances of our young people. It's been highly disruptive as to their plans, but that's why we think we need to put in place a scheme to ensure every young person in Greater Manchester has got something to go to. We said last week that we would open applications for the Hour Pass for the next cohort coming through from year 11, and they can apply for the Hour Pass from Wednesday. We've said that we will extend free bus travel to young people who've been in care to the age of 21. That's a new commitment that we're making. We're also saying to those young people who have an Hour Pass, which is about to expire, that they can continue to access the free opportunities for the rest of this year, given the challenging situation that young people find themselves in. So that will apply to people who are 18 going into life beyond college. So we're doing what we can to try and support young people, and a lot of the policies we've got are entirely consistent with this plan, which is a place-based approach, working with communities and all public services to ensure that we give every person growing up in Greater Manchester the best possible start in life, and we make sure we've got resilient communities able to support each other and to bring down levels of serious crime. But finally, one thought from me before I hand over to the Deputy Mayor. We also feel we need to have a greater focus on victims as part of this work, to learn from their experience, to support them at all times. And that's why we're making a commitment today to establish a victims champion for Greater Manchester to improve our responsiveness to victims of crime. So that's enough from me to start. Looking forward to hearing from all of the people we have on the panel today. So without further ado, I will hand over to our Deputy Mayor, Baroness Beverley Hughes. Bev.
Thank you very much, Andy, for that introduction. It's a great pleasure for me. We've worked so hard to get to this point with the Violence Reduction Action Plan across all the partnership that it's really good to have today to be able to talk about it more publicly, and delighted that Ibby and Helen and Ian are also with us, and I'm going to hand over to them in a little while. But just to give you a very brief overview, you know, I don't think we can underestimate the damage that violence causes, both to individuals and particularly to children and young people. If they're caught up in it, either in their families or in their communities, it affects every aspect of their development, their happiness, their confidence. It literally blights their lives for a very, very long time. And similarly for families, for parents worried about their children caught up in violence or living in a community where it doesn't feel safe to go out. This is a terrible burden for people to carry, and it causes immense damage that is very enduring. And that's why it's such a priority for us. As Andy said, like the national trends, we saw knife crime and serious violence increase enormously over the last few years, from 2015 to 2018 here in Greater Manchester, as elsewhere. And so it's absolutely vital that we address it. But I think what we've learned from other areas who've been piloting this work for some time is that whilst strong enforcement is an absolute priority, and that has to be the starting point, that has to be the message, strong enforcement of itself will not prevent violence and will not reduce violence in a sustainable way, because you also have to tackle the other factors that contribute to the cause and the rise of violence in our communities. And what those other areas have taught us, building on evidence, very strong evidence, is that you need to take an approach which starts right upstream, that's preventative, that intervenes early and addresses a whole range of factors that might be relevant in any particular situation. So that means gathering data and intelligence. It means identifying where the areas of most need are. It means working with all aspects of the public and voluntary sector, particularly health, because as we've heard, people who are victims of knife crime, violent crime, end up in hospitals. And it doesn't make any sense at all that we don't use the information about what's happening to people in our hospitals as a starting point for understanding. Similarly, with our community organisations, who very often are striving to support people in those difficult circumstances and help them. So that's the starting point. It's about using data and intelligence really effectively to identify areas most in need, and then bringing to bear a whole range of people from different organisations, health, education, particularly the criminal justice system, our local authorities, and community organisations. And really that's what this is about. The money from the Home Office has been delivered via 2 tranches. One tranche was directly to the police to improve the number of police officers who are able to work in our communities and be visible. And the second to the Mayor's Office, effectively, to establish a whole range of work programmes that will address these other factors. And that is what the Violence Reduction Unit is about. Bringing together and embedding in that unit police officers, educationalists, health people, probation service and voluntary organisations. So the plan itself has got 7 key priorities. Improving the criminal justice system response to these problems, including the number of police officers. Supporting voluntary and community organisations and having, as Andy said, a groundbreaking attempt through pilots in 6 areas to have community-led responses to these problems, to draw on the knowledge and the expertise and the commitment of people living in communities to help alongside public sector workers, health workers and so on to resolve those issues. Ensuring that families and communities most affected are really supportive, and that victims also are at the centre of what we do. And Andy's already mentioned the Serious Violence Victims Champion that we're going to appoint to help us make sure that we advocate properly and deliver as far as we can for victims. Working with community safety partnerships, because they are our organisations out in local authorities, and collaborating particularly with schools and colleges and alternative provision to help prevent violence. So far, we've allocated in 2019-2020, just over £3 million to the 10 Greater Manchester Community Safety Partnerships, and they've instituted a wide range of programmes to support parents, to build a trauma-informed approach, to work directly with young people. Over 3,000 young people have been engaged in awareness raising around knife crime, and also an approach that tries to take some of these weapons off the streets. So there's been some groundbreaking work by our police service here, working with Border Force, and Forever Amnesty, and actually intercepting weapons as they are coming into the country. And I've been down to the Violence Reduction Unit and seen the arsenal, literally the arsenal of knives that they have confiscated through that approach, taking those weapons off the streets, testing the retailers who sell these weapons too, and making sure that we can really, take these weapons out of the system. So a great deal of work has already gone on, and a lot of things achieved. Obviously, COVID has had an impact. because so much of the work that our community safety partnerships have been doing has been about directly engaging with young people in every borough in Greater Manchester, and some of those that involve face-to-face contact have had to be suspended, and we're trying to find other ways to deliver those. Nonetheless, I think it's important that we carry on that work, and indeed the Home Office require us to spend 20% of the money they're giving us on direct work with young people, so that's an absolute priority. I'd like to bring in now Ibi to say something about the community focus in this, and then Helen, if I may, before going to Ian to talk about the police work. Ibi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Beth. I'd first of all like to welcome the action plan that's been produced. I think it's been a long time in coming, and it's a very, very important piece of work that we hope to implement as soon as possible. I work for a grassroots community organisation in Bolton, very much in those areas that have been identified. And on the ground, often we've found that we've been doing things very much under capacity, and also not knowing where to turn to for support. And I think that this has really brought things together in a very effective way. And with great power comes great responsibility. So I think empowering communities to solve the problems for themselves is something that we've been crying and yearning out for, because at the end of the day, we live in these areas. There's nobody that's got more vested interest than us to tackle the problems that we are facing. And just to see people turn away from the path that they were once on and turn away into a more positive path is just enlightening in itself, and it can be done, and it has been done in the past. So I very much welcome the plan. I'm also very glad that it's being tested in different areas within Greater Manchester, because the place-based solution is absolutely the key to tackle these problems. Manchester is different to Bolton, and Bolton is different to Oldham, and Oldham is different to Bury. So it's absolutely key that we have that community buy-in and that local intelligence and local support. Just from a community perspective, there's a breadth of diversity of organisations out there working either in a preventative way to try and prevent some of the issues that we're facing, or support for victims, or in many cases for organisations to doing both at the same time. So this wraparound approach is very much key, and I think that the fact that Greater Manchester has put their money where their mouth is and are actually willing to support this with resources so that we have the capacity not just to do it with words but with action as well is it's welcome. This is something that we've been yearning for decades, to be honest, and the fact now that we have this exciting opportunity to take the power in our own hands and run with it is something that I'm very much looking forward to as well. I'm just going to leave with this final point. I think world events have shown that, you know, we live in times where trust needs to be built between communities and public institutions, and I think the voluntary and community sector is that bridge in between. And I think initiatives like this is very much the thing that is needed for us to rebuild that trust and to get that community buy-in. We know what we need to do, and we need your help to do it. So let's work together to do it.
Well said. Great.
Thanks, Ibi. Helen, would you like to contribute from a health point of view? Thanks.
Thank you. As we know, violence, it is complex, it's far-reaching, and it's absolutely devastating issue that impacts on all of us really in one way or another. And it's about recognising the complexity around violence, because there's no one factor, there's no one reason that explains why some individuals behave more violently towards others, or why there's not one reason why violence is more prevalent in some communities than others. It's because of a multiple levels, it's multiple factorial, various components in relation to this, and that's influenced on our behaviour, and that might be from an individual perspective, but also our social relationships, our community relationships, and the wider societal factors. And what's really pleasing about the plan that we've got across Greater Manchester is that we're recognising the complexity that's involved. We're taking that community-led, place-based public health approach to preventing violence. We want to stop violence from happening in the first place, where we would call primary prevention, really stopping that from even happening in the first place. But for those people who are maybe at higher risk of violence or who are already involved in violence, we want to stop that violence from escalating and to reduce the harm that's caused. So what we'd class as the secondary and tertiary prevention aspects. But to have that real preventative approach towards violence and preventing violence, we really need to come together. It's already been mentioned. We need our agencies, our professionals, our experts, but most importantly, we need to work alongside our communities, and especially those communities who are most affected by violence. And that's why the work of this action plan, the Violence Reduction Unit, is so crucial, but it's also very innovative, where we're bringing us all together as a team and having that truly preventative approach. We absolutely need to, and we want to support young people so that they can make positive choices in their lives. And one way to do this is actually to get past their presenting behaviours and to actually really understand why people present in such a manner, and why people may be at a greater risk of either being a perpetrator or a victim of violence, or indeed live in the fear of violence, of the threat of violence, and really getting to understand that root causes and to understand the causes of the causes. And through this piece of work, through this large-scale programme, we'll be addressing violence prevention on a number of levels and getting to those root causes, which is why it's so key and so crucial. But that also includes looking at childhood adversity and trauma within our communities, and often call it adverse childhood experiences or ACEs, because we now recognise, we now know those long-term impact that ACEs have go into adulthood. And in particular, we know that the more childhood adversity people have and across communities, then the higher the risk of physical violence in adulthood, whether you're a victim or whether you're a perpetrator of that physical violence. But also the increased risk of alcohol dependency, drug misuse, being in a prison setting, and also spending greater time in hospitals. So we have an ambition for Greater Manchester as part of the plan to have that to be ACE and trauma informed, where our communities are ACE and trauma informed, as well as our organisations, so that we can actually respond in innovative ways, have a cultural change, think about policy, think about where we're wanting to make those changes with our communities, to reduce the impact of the consequences of ACEs, so that we have that nurturing, we have a responsive relationship, healthy social relationships, and for people to really have a sense of purpose. So really around as well, what we're looking at is within our communities, that the social relationships, the wider, through our education, colleges, workplaces, schools, and our neighbourhoods is absolutely crucial. And that's why as well, working in partnerships across our health and care, across our communities, police, health and so on, because we know that we want to really get to the understanding of this, to prevent this from to prevent violence from happening, and so that we all recognise the roles that we play to help support violence reduction. Where there's a sense of belonging and connectivity and connectedness with our communities, and opportunities for people to flourish is so important. And by having that better understanding of the problem through our local data and intelligence, and again, we're working really hard across Greater Manchester to make that connectivity with the data and intelligence, we can really spot where things are working well, where we can scale things up, or where we may want to stop or change and ask why, what's happening, so that we can really focus on making differences for our, again, local communities, and in particular our younger population. So, as I said at the beginning, violence, it is complex. There's no one single intervention to solve this issue. We need to have that community led. It needs to be that wider public health approach to really get underneath the issues, and at the place-based, absolutely crucial to all of this. So really good and pleased to see, and as Ibby said, really welcome the plan and really help to drive it forward across the community. So thank you.
Thanks, Helen. And Deputy Chief Constable Ian Pilling.
Yeah, thank you, Bev. I think everybody else has said, I personally and we in GMP really welcome this plan. And I know you've made the point, Bev and Andy, a few minutes ago, that, you know, although the police have a key role to play here, what we can't ever hope to do is enforce our way out of this. And when it comes to the point of police intervention and making an arrest following, you know, the commission of a crime, invariably that means that all the preventative work has failed because we've actually ended up with a crime taking place. And we really need to work, you know, through the plan, as the plan details, with all the partners to ensure that we're doing all we can around understanding what causes people to carry knives and what causes people to commit violent crime, so that we can really get into the preventative aspects. Now, we've been doing partnership work for a long time in Greater Manchester with, you know, the probation service, with yourselves at the combined authority, with the health services, youth justice, local authorities, and probably most importantly with our communities. But what this plan, combined with the funding, has enabled us to do is to redouble those efforts and to really focus on understanding what works and putting those plans into place. Now, we've been doing work with young people in schools. We've worked with over 3,000 young people in schools already, as part of getting that message across as that very early stage in people's lives, as the harms that violent crime can cause, to really start that preventative journey. And that is already showing us some real benefits. Now, as I've said, you know, we can't enforce our way out of this, but enforcement still does have a part to play. I'd just like to spend a few minutes just talking about some of the things that we have been doing. So Operation Concept is an operation that we've launched together with Border Force. And what we've been able to do through some very clever, slightly sneaky methods, is work out that when packages are coming into the country, which one of them, those packages, contains knives that have been ordered from overseas. Apologise for my fire alarm. Which of those packages have come in from overseas, and by doing that, obviously we've got a real clue in so much as the address that package was going to is clear for all to see. So what we can do is we can get hold of the knife, we can stop it from coming into the country, and then we can take action against the person that's actually ordered it. So we're doing that. We're also doing weapon sweeps, and just briefly to explain about that, because we've increased our activity around stop and search, what we're finding offenders are doing is they are leaving knives secreted in public places. So when they come out of the house, they don't carry a knife. So if they get stopped, you know, they won't be in possession of the knife. So what we're actually doing is working out where those locations are and searching them on a regular basis. And what we're actually finding is that we can retrieve a significant number of knives. So if you combine that with what we've been doing around the knife amnesties, and people will have seen, you know, those bins that we place outside police stations, other public places. We've recovered already over 1,000 knives since the start of this initiative, which otherwise may well have ended up in the hands of offenders. And finally, you know, we've been increasing levels of policing. As Andy said, we're trying to make as much of that as possible on a community basis. So increasing our presence in local communities, looking at where schools want schools officers, where it is a valid thing to do, again, in conjunction with local community, to further enhance that preventative work in schools. And where we need to, we've been doing what's called surge activity, and that, as the name suggests, is putting large numbers of officers into a certain area where we know there's been increases in crime, or we've got intelligence there's going to be increases in crime. And already, if you look at the last 12 months compared to the 12 months before, we've arrested 941 more people for knife-related offences than the previous year. And as we've said, you know, the crime numbers appear to be going down, the arrests are going up, which is a good thing for policing. But just to re-emphasise, enforcement is only part of the overall plan, and we welcome the launch of this strategy and action plan today. Thank you.
Okay, over to you, Andy, I think.
Well, thanks, Bev, Ibby, Helen and Ian. You've all spoken so well, and really grateful that you've given us your time this afternoon. And Ian, I particularly would want to thank you, the Chief Constable, and everyone in Greater Manchester Police, because you can be proud of those figures. Things are moving in a better direction. Of course, further to go, but it's good to hear that there is genuine progress that we can report to the public. So that's down to a lot of hard work from a lot of people in your organisation. So we thank you for that. Just to finish then, this plan has been a long time coming, I think, as a couple of people said. And I just want to thank the Deputy Mayor and everyone who's been involved in the work to make it happen. It has been a huge effort across communities in Greater Manchester, and we really appreciate the care that's gone into this. And to stress in many ways what Ibi was saying, you know, we've had talk of the public health approach nationally, and Helen is absolutely right to take that trauma-informed approach. But this is about going further, doing what we'd like to do, develop a distinctive Greater Manchester response. And this community-led approach is a different way of coming at this, saying, you know, we start with communities, and as Ibi said, the solutions to violence lie within those communities. It is partly about enforcement, but it's about more than that, isn't it? I think we will do more to tackle serious violence. There's better solutions than just recruiting more police officers, and those solutions are building a sense of belonging, building a sense of hope and opportunity in all of the communities of Greater Manchester. That's what we're about. That's what this plan speaks to. And I hope that though we might have 6 pilots coming into being, the principle of a community-led approach is going to be permanent in terms of the way we work from here. So thanks for tuning in today, everybody. I think Jimmy's going to take us through your questions, and over to you, Jim.
Thank you, Andy. So the first question is for Ibi and Helen, and it's from Aaron at Roch Valley Radio. And Aaron at 143 asks, in order to tackle violent crime in Greater Manchester, will educating youngsters within our most deprived areas lead to the greatest level of crime reduction, especially if we are using long-term thinking to find a solution to the problem? I suppose Ibi first, but Helen, I ask you as well, because of course the plan uses a community-led approach, but public health is integrally involved. But Ibi.
Yeah, thanks. Good question. I think it's one of the factors that would really help in terms of tackling this issue. I think it's not just education only. I think it's a multitude of different opportunities based upon what the wants of the individual is. So what we need to have is like a pick and mix of opportunity, so that there's alternatives out there. I think a lot of young people that we're working with see the lifestyle that they're leading and the alternatives, and they feel that the lifestyles that they're leading are a lot more viable option towards them. So it's about tackling that with more opportunities, and educating youngsters is one of them. Also employment, also other things like volunteering and seeing what interests they have, and working on that and developing that as well.
Yes, completely support what Ibi says, and just adding into that, education is absolutely key right across all population groups, not just those in disadvantaged areas, but right across, because it's understanding the impact that how we behave as well towards other people is absolutely vital. But in addition to that, it is, as Ibi said, is that even if we educate, or as we educate children, young people, if they're then going back into an environment and a living environment where they're surrounded by other life chances through that, whether it's more susceptible to seeing crime, violence, then we really need to work right across. And that's again why the importance of this plan is looking at every single level on this and every different opportunity, and again right through. So yes, education has a really key part in this, but it's not the only part. It's similar to like we can't police our way out of this, we can't educate our way. It's a whole number of opportunities to create. And I think again some of the examples that Ibi talked about, whether that's through opportunities to volunteer, support for parents as well as for young people, as well as unemployment, and right across the whole agenda is absolutely crucial. So it's a whole suite of aspects really. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. A question for Ian. This is the second part of Tom Dambach's question from Hits Radio. Ian, Tom at 147 asks, what role will police officers play in schools and how will this address youth violence?
Okay, you know, traditionally we've had officers based in schools because of austerity. You know, they've been turning it over the last few years. I think what I would say is it's not right for all schools. The schools got to want it and there's got to be a need for it, and we'll be having that discussion with each individual school to make sure it's the right thing to do. Where I've seen it work best is where the officer, because they're embedded in the school, builds up a relationship with the young people within that school. And what starts to happen is the young people will speak to the officer, they'll confide in the officer, and the officer will be able to start that engagement with those young people and really start to understand the issues that are affecting them and impacting them. It's not just for the officer, it's for the school to do as well and other partners to support, but we start to understand what the challenges are within that school that are affecting the young people so that we can start to design what the solution is with other agencies. I think also police officers doing inputs, you know, done in the right way. We've got a lot of officers and PCSOs that are really skilled in the way in which they speak to young people, and they're able to get the message across to them in a really powerful way that maybe, you know, teachers aren't able to do. But again, it's not a police versus teacher thing. This has got to be done side by side. So we do that joint working. As I say, it's something we really want to build up, but we'll only be doing it when it's right for the school and the community.
Thank you, Ian. So the next question is for Bev, and Andy may want to comment off the back of this as well. This is the second part of Tom's question at 147, which is community groups have been calling for community-led approaches to tackling violence for years. Why has it taken until now to properly commit to this?
Well, thanks for that question, Tom. You know, I think a number of our speakers today have said it's been a long time coming. In fact, there have been a lot of attempts over the years by local authorities, particularly, and a number of government initiatives over the last 10 years or more, to give communities the lead and work in partnership around different kinds of problems in their areas, including violence. I think the difficulty has been that they have often not been very sustained. The funding hasn't been sustained, and so the kind of partnership is fragmented. What this opportunity gives us is to really pilot that approach on the basis of firm evidence, to have the funding in place to continue that approach so that it can last long enough to see if it really can work and make a difference. And thirdly, to have behind us the academic support that we're getting from Manchester Metropolitan University to evaluate the outcomes of those pilots. So really to have a robust approach both to implementation and to evaluating whether or not it works. And I think that is the difference here. We've got the infrastructure across Greater Manchester through the Violence Reduction Unit to do this systematically and properly in 6 areas. And I'm just confident that this is probably the best chance we've had for a long time to really do this in a proper, sustained way and to show that it works.
Thank you, Bev. Andy, do you have anything to add to that point?
Briefly, Jimmy. Thanks. Thanks, Bev. I mean, just to build on that, I think why only now, Tom, is your question. It's because what Bev has been saying, we've been working hard to lay the foundations of a place-based approach in Greater Manchester, completely breaking down the silos between different public services. But actually, one of the things I said as mayor, when I came in, I want to just re-emphasise today, I did say at that point, let's start working with community and voluntary organisations as equal partners. It's not always the way that the public sector treats community players. It can often sort of hand out a bit of project funding here and there and make them jump through a lot of hoops. I said I wanted them to be treated as equal partners with long-term funding and support. And it takes time to change that. But I think we are beginning to get to a point where that is where everyone is going now. And we all start with the community as opposed to doing 2 communities. So it's taken a long time to turn the talk into reality. But I think that is the growing reality in Greater Manchester, that we're building from the bottom up in terms of the way we do things. The key to it will be, of course, in these pilot areas, if the community is asking for something, for a particular individual or a certain response, are we going to be able to kind of respond quickly to that, to build that trust in this? And that's where this will hinge. If a community makes a call for something that it wants, it's going to all be about, can we then deliver and respond quickly? And that's where I'll be watching very closely to see that this works. It's not a token gesture by any means. This is about saying communities hold the information that Ian and his colleagues need. And as Ibby said, communities hold the solutions that will actually enable them to tackle serious violence. So, that is what we're starting with here. But the key will be, all of the public bodies of Greater Manchester being not just sort of using the language of community-led, but actually properly putting it into practice. And, I'll be watching very carefully to see that is what happens.
Thank you, Andy. So a question for Bev from Kevin Fitzpatrick at Radio Manchester at 2:06. And then a follow-up from Liv Clark at the Bolton News, also at 2:06. Kevin asks, what are the specific targets that these 6 pilots will be judged against? Liv from Bolton asks, why is Bolton among the boroughs selected for the action plan? And you could take from that, why have the 6 boroughs been selected as pilot areas? And perhaps Helen and Ibby would like to come in on how Bolton as a borough might be boosted by being one of the 6.
Okay. Well, there are some targets for the plan as a whole around, I think Andy mentioned some of them, hospital admissions and presentations for assaults with a knife, for instance, non-domestic homicides, the severity of serious violence incidents. There's a suite of 6 overall outcomes for the plan as a whole, and they will apply in the pilots, but also the scope, depending on the particular nature of that pilot and the objectives that the community itself feels are important, to add to those some specific targets, by negotiation with the community and the local authority. So there's the core, and then there's the potential for some specific targets. The way in which the 6 local authorities were selected was based on the work of Manchester Metropolitan University, who did a very detailed analysis for us of the incidents and particularly the clustering of violent crime across Greater Manchester. And we selected those 6 on the basis that there was potential there for us to have 6 good pilots relating to serious violence. But Helen might want to say a bit about what she sees as the potential in Bolton.
Thanks. I think really the potential for Bolton is similar for all of the other five areas as well. It is again really having that local, what's right for Bolton and what's right for each of the areas. That's going to make a difference to those areas. So what's going to make a difference to Bolton? How do we bring in the components that we're working, again, community led, but being supported and working with all of our partners across Bolton, whether that's be from private businesses, public sector, but listening to our communities. And again, I'm sure Ibby will want to add more into this, but it is around really being unique to those areas. So as has already been mentioned, it was work that was done by MMU, Manchester University, to really understand what's the levels of the data, what's that happening at a ward level and at our lower super output area. But what also can make a difference, and the support and the assets that we can use within our communities to build upon, so that we can have that environment at the local level to improve for our young people in particular.
Yeah, I echo what both Bev and Helen have said in relation to why the areas were selected. I think the only thing I'd add to that as well is that, particular to Bolton, a lot of the infrastructure is in place as well. There's really good examples of partnership working that's been, evidenced and identified, and with the extra support from Greater Manchester, there could be a real impact in terms of making a change as well to many lives in Bolton as well. So I think that there's good evidence of being able to hit the ground running in Bolton as well.
Thank you, Ibby. Quick question for Bev at 212. This is Alison Spooner at Global Radio, who asks, can you tell us, Bev, a bit more about the Victims Champion and what that's going to involve?
Yes, well, this will be the appointment of an independent victims champion, independent of the police, independent of the criminal justice system completely. And what we want that person to do is particularly to work with organisations, very often that we are commissioning, because through the Mayor's office, quite outside of this plan, we commission a lot of services for victims from a lot of different organisations. And in fact, we've got a review of those services going on at the moment. And that Victims Champion will particularly work with those organisations and try to make sure that they really are meeting the needs of victims. You know, so that we can make sure that as we refine those services, victims' needs are met, because we do have some evidence, and that's why I'm undertaking this review of all our services at the moment. That sometimes even for voluntary organisations, what they think they are giving to victims is what victims want, whereas actually when you talk to victims directly, as we have been through this review, it's actually something different that they needed. So it's really sharpening our focus on the needs of victims and trying to make sure that the services that we commission for them are really meeting their needs, and advocating for the rights of victims to be at the heart of this, which is, it is at the heart of our plan, and we want that to be carried through into the way this plan is delivered.
Thank you, Bev. These are two questions now for Ian, and then Bev and Andy may wish to come in off the back. So the first Ian is at 212. It's Alison from Global Radio, who asks, with pubs being allowed to reopen again on Saturday, what challenges does that present for the police, and what sort of operation will be in place for that? And a sort of associated question is Andy Smith from Wish FM at 210. Are you concerned about the easing of lockdown restrictions and that it could lead to a spike in violent crime? And Andy cites, for instance, in the past few weeks, we've seen violence at illegal raves and parties. And what would your message be to concerned members of the public?
Yeah, thanks, Jimmy. I'll probably work backwards from the last point first, really. And, you know, over the last couple of weeks, we have been really challenged across Greater Manchester, you know, with some significant public gatherings. A couple of weeks ago, we had a couple of significant raves, you know, big events in the open air, and we put a significant policing operation in place the weekend just gone and the one before that to stop that from happening again. You know, last weekend we disrupted 13 separate raves and stopped them from being set up. A much smaller number in the weekend just gone, possibly contributed to by the wetter weather, albeit still some small gatherings. There's coverage in the media today of a small event at Bolton that we disrupted and people sort of dispersed, but still left some real mess in a really beautiful public park. And you know, I just question, you know, what drives people to do that. So we have had some challenges. We've not been alone in that. You know, they've happened around the country. I think one of the positives that I derive from within Greater Manchester, we've avoided any sort of real confrontation with our public, you know, because of the way we've policed them. Having said that, that's not to say we're going soft, and we will take action when we think we need to. So just looking at this weekend, clearly, you know, the pubs, as you've said, reopen on Saturday. You know, I think if you just look at what's been happening in the last few weeks, people becoming more bored with the lockdown, the weather getting warmer, you know, the nightclubs not opening, festivals being cancelled. I think people are generally wanting to go out and have a good time. So I think we'll see that on Saturday. We've got a significant policing operation in place across all of our towns and cities, across the pubs, and also to prevent or deter any raves from taking place again. But I think, you know, for me, this isn't just about the police. We can only respond to what's put in front of us. And my plea would be that we all come together across Greater Manchester. Particularly, I appeal to the public who are going to go out and about this Saturday night and enjoy those pubs that are being reopened. Please behave sensibly. I think the media have got a part to play in this as well, in the way that, you know, the build up to the weekend is reported. And I think what I'd like to do is be sat here sort of next Monday looking back and seeing that we've had a really, really good reopening of the pubs across Greater Manchester without any disorder taking place. In summary, our plans are in place, but I hope not to be able to have to need to deploy those officers.
Thank you, Ian. And Bev, if you have something you'd like to add.
Well, I just echo Ian's point there, really. Said at the press conference last week, I think we are in a volatile situation across the country. Restrictions are being relaxed. There's tensions from other sources, understandably, and in the mix of things, it's quite easy to see that this is it could be a turbulent time. But I think we have to appeal to people to not go out, to not engage in that kind of disorder, and certainly as regards illegal raves, we will continue to bear down on those. They really are very dangerous places. I mean, by and large, the ordinary gatherings, while some have been large, that the police have had to attend to, the Black Lives Matters marches and events and so on, have been very orderly, very peaceful, very peaceable. The raves are dangerous places, and that is where serious crime and violence can take place, and that is why we will continue to bear down on those.
Thank you, Bev. And Andy, any comments? You're on mute, Andy.
Thanks, Jimmy. Yes, just very briefly. Ian can't say this, so I am going to say this. I think it is downright reckless to allow pubs to reopen on a Saturday when the country's been in lockdown. A Saturday in the summer, in the middle of a pandemic. There was no consultation. There should have been consultation with people at a more local level, and I think it is a real concern. And I would echo Ian's appeal to the media not to build this up. I can report though from our nighttime economy advisor Sasha Lord that quite a lot of operators in Greater Manchester are reporting that they won't be opening on Saturday. I think taking a cautious safety first approach, which I would endorse, to be honest. I think it is right that this is done carefully and is built up over time rather than everything coming back at once. So I'd like to thank the industry across Greater Manchester for taking that approach. I would absolutely echo stay local, take it easy. We want people to enjoy everything that Greater Manchester's got to offer, but coming back all in one go is not the way to do it. And as we're seeing with the issue in Leicester today, there is still a lot of this virus in circulation, and that's the main thing that I would want to get over to people before the weekend. For the first time on Friday, we kind of shone a light on the number of cases over the last 7 days, because we finally got the national testing data, and it was just under 500 new cases in Greater Manchester last week. That is a lot of virus still in circulation across our communities. So I would just say to everybody, look at those figures, think about what that means, and proceed with caution this weekend.
Thank you, Andy. And so this is a question still with you, Andy, and then one for Ian. The question is from Niall Griffiths at the MEN at 221. Andy, when the pledge for an officer in every ward was announced in February, it was said that 20 schools had been earmarked for getting these school-based officers. Do you know if that is still correct or if that's changed? And for Ian, are these schools and so are those officers in any particular part of the region?
Well, I'll ask Ian to deal with the specific, Niall, but as far as I understand it, it is still the case. But we're not imposing these officers, as Ian said before. It's where there's a need, where the school wants it, and where it's supported by the community. And that is a really important principle, I think, from which to work. I received a very strong call from a number of Manchester head teachers that they wanted to see a return to school-based officers, and I think there is a call, particularly from within the city, for this. Some people have concerns about does this criminalise young people, or does it send a particular message about certain schools? I would just want to go back to when we had school-based police officers before, and I'm talking about my experience as the Member of Parliament for Lee, and I remember having a number of local schools with school-based officers. it's not, in some ways, it embodies the community-led approach. You know, officers aren't providing a heavy-handed presence. In fact, they're doing the opposite. We're working with young people to provide after-school activities, and you know, where they're successful, they are really successful. And it's about taking that approach to this, rather than, as I say, kind of creating an oppressive or a heavy-handed atmosphere within the school. So, you know, it's going to be very much going with the grain where they're wanted. But yes, to answer the question, I think there are funds there to be able to recruit 20 if that's what people want. Ian, I've got that right, I hope.
Yes, I think it was the officers that had been earmarked back in February, not the schools that they were going to. Clearly that work is ongoing, but it's not necessarily either or this, and even the schools that don't benefit from having a full-time officer, they'll still have a neighbourhood officer or a PCSO that's responsible for the links with that school. So even the schools that you know don't get or don't want their own officer actually working full time in the school, they'll still have the links with the local neighbourhood team, and that'll suit some schools that don't want the full time officer. You know, we can have a look at what sort of suits those schools best. But over the next few weeks, we'll be working with those schools to work out which ones it will be, and we'll get the officers in place, as Andy said, over the next few months.
Thank you, Ian. And then the final question is one for Bev, and then possibly Ibby as well, and it's from Aaron Benson at Roch Valley Radio. It's at 2:25. Alongside educating young people, are there any plans to reintroduce youth clubs or encourage teenagers to join youth clubs and community centres, thus taking them off the streets and reducing the chances of violent crime taking place? So maybe Bev first, and Ibby might want to comment on the benefits of that, and then Bev for any closing remarks.
Well, thanks, Aaron. I think this is a really important question, because I think it's a really important principle, and I do regret a lot, really, the demise of youth clubs and a whole range of provision for young people over the last 20 years or so. It's not something that the mayor or at a Greater Manchester level we could actually implement, because it's for local authorities, and actually I have to say I commend those local authorities who, against all the odds, since the funding has been withdrawn over the years of austerity for youth provision in particular, that some have managed to keep some of their youth provision up. There are still some youth centres, there are still some outreach youth workers working on the streets with young people, and that is against all the odds, because they get very little government funding for that provision now. But I think if we could increase that level of provision and increase the opportunities for young people to do a whole range of activities, whether it's in the creative sector or sport, then I think that's really all to the good, and it really helps young people. In fact, through the VRU, through the Violence Reduction Unit, we are working with sporting organisations trying to promote that kind of activity particularly, and we're doing what we can on that front. But yes, you're right, that kind of provision for young people is very important and could make a very big difference if there were a lot more of it about.
Thank you. And Ibby, do you have anything you'd like to say about youth clubs?
I think Bev's covered it all, to be honest. One of the, I think, most tragic things that I've seen in my professional life is the decimation of youth services and youth provision under, you know, the times of austerity. And I really do believe that there is a correlation between the lack of youth provision and also the increase in terms of youth crime and other things as well as related with that as well. I think that what the question states needs resource, and let's not be blunt about it. And if we're talking brass tacks, it does need resource behind it to get those things off the ground and to maintain these things happening in the long term as well. But absolutely agree with the sentiment that Bev's stated, and the importance of youth provision and youth services on a multitude of different things as a tool against all problems that are facing young people today.
Thank you, Ibby. And anything, Andy, you'd like to add to that?
Thanks, Jimmy. I mean, just to say that we do have some fantastic youth clubs in Greater Manchester, based on the model that grew out of Bolton, actually. Bolton Lads and Girls Club. I was there earlier this year. Feels like a long time ago now, but it was brilliant to be there. You know, absolutely bustling sort of atmosphere, and you know, so many kind of brilliant opportunities for young people within that environment. Obviously, Wigan have got a youth zone. We have Madlow. So the Onside organisation has been a good partner for us, and we'd certainly like to see the expansion of those type of clubs across Greater Manchester, because they really do work, and all communities should be within reach of one. So that's on youth clubs, but we're kind of recognising, as Bev said, that we don't have the budget to go into every community and build a youth club. We've been trying to think creatively as well about how we can support young people. And I just want to come back to our pass a second, because it always was intended to combine free bus travel with free opportunities. But if I'm honest, the opportunity side of our pass haven't yet sort of fully come to life, I think, or a lot of young people haven't quite realised what that side of it is all about. What it is obviously free opportunities for young people, tickets, but a whole range of other things, and then they're then able to use the free bus travel to access those opportunities. And we're about to have a big revamp actually of the RPass website. We're going to be increasing the number of opportunities, and I'm making an appeal actually to all businesses in Greater Manchester, you know, many of which have been receiving public support in recent times. I want every business in Greater Manchester, whatever they do, to make an offer to the young people of Greater Manchester, some kind of benefit, opportunity, discount, whatever it might be. We're all going to have to work hard now to support this next generation, because the disruptive effect of COVID on their lives has been absolutely massive. And I think we need to work really hard to help people, if you like, back on track, who may have been completely thrown off course by what's been happening. And RPass is one of the ways that we can do it. Let's just fill that website with opportunities, positive things for young people to do. And in effect, what that is a virtual youth club for the whole of Greater Manchester, so that, you know, there's things going on in all of our boroughs that young people can access, and that we can give them that sense of hope that I spoke about at the beginning. So I said when I came into this role that, you know, I left a Westminster system that has always made young people its target for cuts, and it did that going back to the start of austerity. And I believe the opposite is what you need to do to build a healthy, safe society, and that is make young people our priority for investment, and they are my priority for investment. Alongside the RPass, we've got new ways of providing mental health support to young people through mentally healthy schools, digital provision of mental health support. There is so much more we need to do, but I'm really, really pleased actually that Diane Madal is leading the young person's task force for us, and going to advise me soon on how we might create a young person's guarantee for Greater Manchester, because coming out of COVID, they need to be our focus. Otherwise, the issues we've come here to discuss today will be so much greater in a couple of years down the line. So, yeah, we can't do it in the traditional way, maybe, of building youth clubs everywhere. But I hope you can see in my answer that we've got some other thoughts about how we might support the young generation through this.
Thank you, and we have no further questions. So thank you to the media for attending and participating today.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Ibby.